very good. So it's all about having enough energy to keep yourself warm, especially overnight when you're probably not eating. So now you see geese, and it's not winter yet, and they're having a wonderful time eating, and there's no problem for them because they graze and they eat a lot. And then the snow comes. So what are they going to do? This is the challenge for animals is finding food during the bad periods of weather. So in the winter, basically they have 4 strategies. They migrate, they adapt, they hibernate, or there are life cycle adaptations where it's not the adult that survives over the winter. So we'll go through each one of these individually. And everything some animals go into periods of dormancy that's not true hibernation. So it's not only hibernation that happens with these animals. So dormancy, there are different things. Torpor, where everything just slows down. Estivation would be hibernation, but only in the summertime. Hibernation would be in the winter. Diapause, where everything is really slowing down. So it's like a really deep sleep. The body temperature drops, the heartbeat slow, the breathing rate slows. A lot of animals prepare for this by putting on a lot of body fat. Think about groundhogs. If you've ever seen a groundhog in the fall, they get pretty fat. Bears do a lot of this. One of the things that helps a lot of them to do this is all the nuts and the acorns and things that are available that have a high fat content. So they are kind of packing on the pounds to get ready for their long period of dormancy. So here's an animal that hibernates in many of these. And by the way, these, with the exception of one of them, all of the pictures here were taken by me in the Seneca Creek watershed. So these are all animals that you could see. So here's a box turtle, eastern box turtle. This little guy is a male. You can tell by both the fact that he's pretty brightly colored, and if you look closely, his eyes are red. And the males, adult males, have those red eyes. So these guys will actually bury themselves in mud below the leaves, and that's where they spend the winter. So finding where to hibernate is a crucial element. Frogs and fish tend to go to the bottom of lakes and ponds. Both of those will stay at the bottom. Fish and frogs don't typically bury themselves in the mud because they need to have more oxygen than is available there. Turtles will actually bury themselves in the mud, although a lot of them aren't completely in hibernation, and if it warms up, they'll actually come back around and move around a little bit. Mammals and insects and galls will go into trees. Bats, there are some species of bats that don't migrate, and they will find themselves some spaces under the bark of trees in particular, but that's not an unusual place. And some of them some bats will even bury themselves in the leaf litter below a tree for the winter. So it's not necessarily that it has fallen out. They're just looking for some place protected out of the worst of the elements. Hill outcrops, burrows, or nests. A lot of animals dig themselves holes in the ground. Squirrels build nests. Caves is particularly for bats. And then we do have a couple of animals that build their own house. Beavers and muskrats build lodges, that we call them, where they live for all year round, but that's what their big winter for survival is being snug in those little things. So here's
what does it mean within galls?
Okay, I'll get to that, but there are insects that the adult does not survive, but it lays eggs in a plant during the growing season. The plant forms a gall around that nasty invasive insect egg or larva, and so that's the form of the insect that will survive the winter and then hatch as an adult in the spring. So insects may
survive. What is a gall?
I'll show you some pictures later. I have some pictures of galls. So here's a little toad, American toad probably, and he will bury himself in the leaf litter to spend the winter. Two here. One of these is a true hibernator and the other one is not. Squirrels, obviously, you know, are around year-round, although when the weather is really bad, they may hunker down in their nests and not come out until things are a little more clement. But the groundhogs are true hibernators, usually between December and March. They will be underground and hibernating. This guy, this is in the fall, he's put on a little bit of weight. So they will hibernate underground. So the hole on the right is a groundhog burrow, and there's a little groundhog hiding at the base of a tree. He had actually a burrow. The center of this tree was rotten, and he had kind of burrowed down between the roots. And he was pretty well camouflaged and did not run away like they usually do because he thought I couldn't see him. Chipmunks, they hibernate, but they're sort of hibernation light. They have multi-chambered burrows where they have a sleeping area, a food stash area, a toileting area. They fill those cheeks like he's got here and fill their burrow with food. So they will stay in the burrow at night, over the winter, but they will wake up and eat because they've got the food there. So they are not sleeping all winter, although most animals don't. They're actually a lot of mammals will kind of be awake partially, but these guys kind of just are hanging out under there, mostly sleeping, but they do wake up and eat a little bit. The wood frog. This one is, I think this is the prettiest frog we have. They breed in the water, but they do live kind of in the woods. They're not necessarily aquatic all the time. They will bury themselves in leaf litter, and they have a sort of antifreeze. The water in their body will be all replaced by a glucose formation, and that keeps them, when water freezes, it expands. So if water inside your cells freezes and expands, it would burst your cell wall. Glucose, on the other hand, will freeze and it will not expand. So they replace the water in their systems by glucose, and they can actually freeze solid. This is beyond hibernation. Everything stops. The heartbeat stops, the respiration stops. They can literally be frozen solid. And then come springtime, they will thaw, and that glucose will go back into a water form, and they survive. That's their survival. And they're a very pretty little frog, little wood frog. Turtles. Turtles are unusual in that they kind of bury themselves in the mud at the bottom of a lake. The aquatic turtles, the box turtle buries himself on land, but these guys go to the bottom. But their senses seem to stay more alert. So they're aware of the light, they're aware of the temperature, and they may move around. And if it gets warm, they might actually come up. So if we have a 60-degree day, you might see a turtle come up and do some basking. And so his hibernation has kind of been interrupted, and then it gets cold again and he'll go back down. So this is a painted turtle, very pretty. That's a common one that we see around there. This one was taken on Clopper Lake. So the biggest hibernator we have is the bear. We do have bears in Maryland. Their heart rate drops pretty dramatically from 40 to 50 beats per minute to 8 to 12 beats per minute. Some small animals are only dormant for part of the day because they can't eat enough food to maintain their energy. So like small birds. Small birds may be almost in a hibernation state overnight, and then as soon as they warm up in the daytime, they will go out and start and eat as much as they can get, because they need that food to maintain some kind of body functioning overnight. So small birds are really dependent on getting enough food during the day just to keep them alive overnight. So here's the bear that was near Hillendale Park and Silver Spring. So that's the one that was not in the Seneca Creek watershed. However, bears were almost extirpated from Maryland. There was a very long period of protection for bears, and they are definitely coming back. We are probably going to see bears here in Montgomery County. They're breeding in all of the western counties and in Frederick County. We probably have them in northern Montgomery County also, although no one is admitting to that yet, but we know anecdotally that they are definitely there.
Bonnie, can I just say that we actually, my daughter saw one on our driveway at about 5:30 or 6 a.m. This was probably about 15 years ago. And at first I thought maybe she was mistaken and had seen a very, very large dog or something. But a couple of days later, I was with a group of other women who live in the Spring Meadows neighborhood, and there were at least 2 other people who had also had a sighting that same day of what they
Yes, we typically see bears in Montgomery County almost every year, and it's usually the young males that are being dispersed. They are told by their mothers, who now has another young cub, that it's time to go out on their own, no more living in the garage, and they have to go out. So they're wandering around Montgomery County looking for new territory, and so far pretty much they have all wandered away because they don't find any females and they haven't established yet. Once we have females denning in the county, we will have some bear population here. So they're not such a dangerous animal as you like to think. They're not a terribly aggressive animal. You don't want to be between mother and cub, and you don't want to bother them, but they'll typically move on their own. So, but if anyone wants to know what to do, if you see a bear, you can call the emergency number, and that office, that the number may not look local, but we actually have the wildlife technician based in Seneca Creek State Park right on Clopper Road in Gaithersburg. There's also a toll-free number for problems. If you have problems, there's actually, if you're a farmer and a bear destroys a lot of your crop, there are monies available for that. And then it's good to know if the land that's near you, if you are in a park, whether you're on state park property or Montgomery County park property. So on the Greenway Trail, so on Great Seneca Creek downstream of Route 355 all belongs to the state. Upstream of 355, that all belongs to Montgomery County. So we will be seeing, sorry?
Mary Kay, 2 years ago, last fall, so a little over 2 years, one on Spring Meadows Drive at about 7:15 in the morning. So yeah, it's about we get them routinely about every 2 years. They're found around Quince Orchard, or I've lived here long enough. I know the rhythm. And we get them up where we are in Darnestown. So we're up against Seneca Creek State Park, and we get them. You know, you always get October. Yeah, it was a year ago. They destroyed my feeders and destroyed some of my neighbor's feeders. And
yes.
It was that really, really nasty storm we had Halloween night. So a year ago Halloween. So that would make it 2019 Halloween night. We had bears. In fact, I kept my hummingbird feeder because it's got bear teeth running up the side of it. And that's my you don't think we have bears? Here you go, honey. Take a look at this.
Oh yeah, we have bears every year, but the question is, are these just young males that are wandering around, or are these females who are denning, spending the winter here and raising their cubs here next year? I believe that up around Peachtree Road in that area, people have seen females with cubs in the very early spring. So they den either in very southern Frederick County or in Montgomery County. And we do have plenty of areas that, you know, the Great Seneca Creek Watershed, Little Bennett Park, Black Hill Regional Park, these are all areas that could have bears. And, you know, it's something to be aware of as you're going out. There was one bear that was, so people call the Department of Natural Resources, and they'll just take reports as to where the bear is going. And typically if the bear seems to be moving back towards Frederick County, or some of them will actually walk across the Potomac in the summertime when the water's low. So they come from Virginia. They don't do anything unless this animal is really heading towards highly dense areas. There was one that they tried to trap multiple times, and he made it all the way to Baltimore County. And it was, you know, they were getting the report. So they will move around quite a bit. There was one a few years ago that made it all the way into the District of Columbia, which you can imagine the panic of the people in the district who reported this bear. So the animal control of the district went out and tranquilized it with a, you know, a tranquilizing dart, put it in the back of the van, and then called the wildlife technician at Seneca Creek State Park and said, hey, Montgomery County, we have your bear in the back of the truck. He's going to wake up in about 20 minutes. Where would you like us to leave him? So if you were around Riley's Lock and that area a number of years ago, there was a bear with a yellow ear tag, because that was that bear that had been caught way back in down in the district. I think he was in Rock Creek Park. I'm not sure. So migration. So a lot of animals just leave, get out of Dodge. We know the weather's going to be bad. We don't know exactly what triggers it all the time, but usually it's just decreasing daylight, day length, that makes animals think it's time to migrate. They are guided by scent, by magnetic field, by instinct, by having learned the route from their parents in previous years. Birds are the prime example of this. Insects, there are some insects, particularly monarch butterflies, that migrate. Whales are long distant migrators. Bats, some bats do migrate, and some of them stay around all year. Elk is a big migration in the western states. And fish, believe it or not, fish will migrate. Crabs will migrate up and down the Chesapeake Bay when it gets cold. So migration can be obligate or facultative. Obligate migrants have to leave. If they don't leave, they will not survive our winter. Think the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds migrate all the way down, typically to Mexico and Central America. They will cross the whole Gulf of Mexico in one long flight, but they usually would not survive up here. Although we do see occasional hummingbirds, usually not ruby-throated, but some other species that gets blown off here. So, and some birds, monarch butterflies have to leave. Whales have a very long thing. And then we have facultative migrants who will only move if they really have to. It might be a partial move, or it might be what they call an eruptive migrants, like the snowy owls. Snowy owls will often, you know, they go south from the tundra, but they don't necessarily come all the way to Maryland every year. But then when there are a lot of them, there are a lot more owls, and they tend to disperse further. So we call those an eruptive migrant. Blue jays, believe it or not, are an eruptive migrant. So blue jays usually stick around here for most of the winter, but if we get some really nasty weather, blue jays will say, I'll see you later. I am heading to the south. And they will only go as far as they need to have better conditions and better availability of food. So here's a monarch that was tagged. I was never able to, there is a phone number on here. I was never able to get the information because the people who tag it have to actually report their thing. But this was in Germantown, actually, along Great Seneca Creek. And so we know where they go in Mexico. So from here, it can be like a 3,000-mile trip down there. So that last generation that hatches out in August, September, they don't reach sexual maturity. And instead of reaching sexual maturity, they put on fat. They get fat. They migrate to Mexico. And in Mexico, they spend the winter in high elevation, in trees. They don't feed very much, although they need water. They do come down to drink. And then in the spring, as the days start to get longer, that's when their reproductive organs will then develop, and they will start flying north. And as soon as they find sufficient milkweed, they will mate, and the female will lay eggs, and then they die. And then the next generation will hatch and continue going further north. So by the time they get here, it's usually the great, great, great grandchild of the one who was born in Maryland last year. That great, great grandchild arrives back in Maryland, and the cycle repeats. So we have a lot of wintering birds. Some of these are year-round birds, but the juncos and some of the other birds are not here in the summertime. We get them in the winter only. Most of the owls, the raptors, the bald eagles, they typically stay here. Again, if the situation got really bad, the eagles might leave further, but the other animals, all of the hawks and owls tend to stay here, the ones that we typically see. Waterfowl, we get a lot of migrant waterfowl in the winter that we don't see so much in the summer. So here's a snowy owl who thinks that winter in Maryland is quite warm and cozy. And this was on Assateague Island.
Oh, that's pretty.
Here's a junco. That one's a little female, and a white-throated sparrow. These two we see only in the wintertime. You know, they nest much further north, but they will spend the winter down here. And so this will play again. On the left, you have January, and these are reports to eBird for locations of these birds. So this is a bird that's nesting June through September. It's in the very northern tip of the United States and in Canada, and it comes down here for the winter time, and then starting about April, they start moving north again. And this is all the citizen science data of people who have recorded their sightings on eBird.
Mm.
So you can generate these for a lot of species. I've actually forgotten which species this is, to be honest. I think it might have been the white-throated sparrow, but I don't recall.
That's cool.
So here was a bird. I took this picture. I was in Costa Rica a few years ago in February, and there were all kinds of exotic birds. It was a lot of fun. And the last place I stayed, they were wonderful. And they had this great bird book of the birds of Costa Rica. And I identified all the birds I found except for this one. And I couldn't find out what it was. So when I got back, I sent it to Dave Powell, who's the most serious birder I know. He's the former manager at Seneca Creek State Park, and said, "What is this? Would anyone like to guess what this is?"
A finch?
It's not. It's a little bit bigger than a finch. This is actually a first-year male Baltimore Oriole.
Wow.
And we don't usually see them like this because they reach this plumage while they're south for the winter. So I went all the way to Costa Rica to see a Baltimore Oriole and didn't even know what it was. But that was fun. So the bluebird, we do have a lot of bluebirds. Since people have been putting up nest boxes, their numbers are increasing again from a precipitous drop during the last century. They are a partial facultative migrant. So in the summertime, bluebirds like open meadow type areas because they need all those insects and caterpillars to feed their young. And in fact, studies show that when a bluebirds nest as pairs and both parents take care of the young, and one of those parents will show up at that box every 1 to 3 minutes all day long during daylight to feed the young as they're growing. In the wintertime, there aren't so many insects, and they rely on berries, so they tend to move from those open fields to the woods. So you'll see them more in a wooded area and sometimes in relatively large flocks. Someone recently told me they saw 40 of them. I tend to see smaller, 6 to 10 maybe, but you'll see them in the woods because they're eating holly berries, dogwood berries, poison ivy berries, service berries, anything like that. They appreciate that for the wintertime. If we get some really severe weather, they will move south. So if we have a mild winter, they probably don't go anywhere from, okay, I'm in the field here, and then I'm going to move into the woods. But if we get some really bad weather, they will go further south. So that's a partial migration from meadow to woods, and then a facultative migrant, whether he has to go, you know, down to Virginia or North Carolina, wherever you need to go to get some decent weather. So then other animals just tough it out. They have to adapt. A lot of animals do remain active in the winter. It's a good time to see them because with the leaves down, you can see more into the woods. Their behavior adapts, their body adapts. They grow thick fur. Some animals, the color may change for camouflage. They may have a lighter colored coat if they're like a snowshoe rabbit that's dark color for the summer and white for the winter. Some animals will grow feathers around their feet for warmth. And then they may have different behavior in the wintertime. A lot of little animals that you think wouldn't be around will tunnel into the snow, and the snow actually acts as an insulation layer. They will create food caches, so that I already mentioned the chipmunk that does a food cache. The beaver does a food cache. I'll show you a slide of that a little later. A lot of birds do food caches, and they will be stuffing food, seeds and things into crevices in trees. I've seen blue jays will sometimes bury things just like squirrels will. Squirrels bury acorns all over the place. Birds will fluff their feathers so they have a nice pocket of air to make that nice down jacket. And then a lot of insects overwinter as eggs or as an immature form, like praying mantis eggs or pupa or larva or caterpillars of moths. So we've all seen a lot of deer around. This is a bunch of does because at this time of year, if there were any males in there, well, some of the little guys, I don't think even any of these little guys have budding horns. So that's a bunch of does just moving around. They do get a thicker coat in the wintertime, and they actually get a white chin for some reason. I'm not sure, but that thing, so we see lots of deer. Beavers, this is a big beaver lodge, and the beavers build their lodge out of sticks and small branches, but then prior to the winter, they actually carry mud up onto the lodge and plaster the whole thing. So if you look at this, it looks almost like a pile of mud. That's because the lodge has been plastered all over with mud. And that mud acts not just as insulation, but in the wintertime, that will freeze because one of the only predators that could get in there would be bears. And if that, it's a lot harder for a bear to rip into a frozen house of a beaver. The one thing they will do, though, is they always leave a little bit of opening at the top for ventilation. So they will spread mud all over the lodge. Their entrance hole is underwater, so there's nothing in come there, and they will have an opening in the top for ventilation. And beavers have typically 2 to 4 babies every year. They mate for life. So in a lodge like this, you might have mother and father. You might have 4 babies that were born last year, 4 babies that were born this year. So you could have 10 beavers in there. And on a really cold day, if you get out there first thing in the morning, you might see steam rising out of there. Looks like they've got a little cozy fire in the fireplace because that body heat is warming things up and it's coming out and hitting the colder air through their ventilation shaft. So here are a couple of beavers, a little one and a mother in the nice summertime. And then on the right, you've got a beaver who's active in the snow. He's pushed up through the ice to keep a little bit of ice open so he can get out and chew on some sticks. You can see he's chewed on a log there on the right-hand side. So they stay active all the time, and you can actually see them swimming under the ice on occasion. So here is a lodge in the background. This beaver pond, which is right off Great Seneca Creek up below Brink Road, it's no longer there, but it was there at the time. They had about a 4-foot tall dam on a little tiny tributary, and the twigs all sticking up out of that water is their winter food stash. So they have cut down trees, cut off all the branches, and dragged them into the water, and then anchored the base of them in the mud at the bottom, and they'll push mud and stones around the base, and then the twigs stick up through the ice. So this can be completely frozen over, but the beavers can still go out of their lodge underwater, swim over and bite off one of those sticks and haul it back into the lodge, and they eat the cambium layer, which is just under the bark, and that's their winter food. So if you go further south, there are beavers in Florida, but they don't do a food stash. They never have to. The further north you go, the bigger the food stash the beavers are going to be making, because they know they need to survive a winter. So they can stay in and have something to eat, even though they're iced in. They can't get out of this when it's completely frozen over. So the birds, here are some lovely turkey vultures. The one on the left looks kind of a little bit fluffed up, and yet the one on the right is spreading his wings out. They usually will spread out for cooling, but another thing they do is that they do eat carrion, and they pick up a lot of bacteria. So by spreading their wings out, that ultraviolet light helps as an antiseptic and to kill some of the bacteria they may have picked up on their wings. Foxes are active year-round. In fact, the foxes lately, I've been hearing a lot of foxes doing a lot of screaming at night or in the evening. It's breeding season, and if you've never heard a fox scream, I suggest you Google that and listen, because you'd think somebody was being murdered in your backyard sometimes. They do give a pretty loud bark and a scream. Sorry, was it? So this one's a red fox. We have gray fox in Maryland. I used to see a lot of them. I haven't seen any in quite a while. They seem to be being displaced by the red foxes. Gray foxes can have a red phase, and so they can look fairly red. The best way to tell is if you can check the tip of the tail, which is not very visible in this, but the tip of the tail on a red fox is white. The tip of a tail on a gray fox is black. And gray foxes are a little interesting. They're very cat-like in their behavior. They will actually climb trees. This one was there because I have peanut butter on a tree, so it enjoys, came out for a little peanut butter snack. Raccoon. Raccoons are active all year. This, they'll raid your food, they'll raid your trash, and then they will spend the day sleeping. So the one on the right was in a tree, and that hole was probably about 35 feet off the ground. And it's not, raccoons are more nocturnal. It's not unusual to see one out during the day, particularly morning or early evening. You know, don't panic just because you see an animal out at the quote unquote wrong time of day, particularly when they're hungry or they've got young to feed. They may be out at other times, but they are more nocturnal. We do have possums. We have lots of possums. Possums are a more southern creature. They're our only marsupial. They are active year-round, but their range is moving north and has been moving north for quite some time. However, their adaptations haven't quite followed, because those no fur on the ears, no fur on the tail means they are very prone to frostbite. And I've actually seen possums that had curly edges of their ears that had obviously been frostbitten, and actually pieces were missing, and one that had lost the tip of its tail, probably both cases due to frostbite. So we do have them around, and they get really fat looking when they're carrying an awful lot of babies in the pouch. I haven't had one come yet carrying those babies on the back. That's what I'd like to see, but they are active most of the winter time. So here are some galls. Someone was asking earlier about galls. The one on the left, this is a blackberry bush, and that funny looking growth, which could be anything from a bright green when it's new, this is kind of winter time, and then by next fall, that'll probably be all brown. There is a wasp that lays an egg. It has a little ovipositor. It digs a hole and lays an egg inside the canes of the blackberry, and the plant forms, and actually you'll get quite a few eggs in there, and the plant will form a lot of excess tissue around there, just trying to wall it off. And that's how the species survives the winter. The adults don't survive the cold weather, but the wasp lays its eggs, and then the eggs spend the winter in there, and they will hatch out in the spring. On the right side are two galls. This is a goldenrod gall fly. Gall, another insect, a type of fly that does the same thing. It lays eggs inside the stem of a goldenrod, and you get the one on the left, perfectly spherical little swelling, and that's a gall that has gallfly eggs in it. The one on the right was probably the year before, and it's hatched and kind of broken up because it died. So those are some examples of galls. There are oak galls, lots of different ones. Then we have Chinese mantis egg cases and other egg cases. We have 4 species of mantises, praying mantises in Maryland. 3 of them are non-native invasive, including this one, the Chinese mantis. We do have Carolina mantises. So, but these are, once you know to look for them, these little Chinese mantis egg cases are pretty easy to find. It's about the size of, at biggest, a ping pong ball. Looks very foamy. That's exactly what it seems like. The female will lay 2 or 3 of these in one area. So if you find one, look around. There's probably 1 or 2 more right nearby. And the adults die. The adults don't survive the winter, but the eggs overwinter in this lovely egg case, and then will hatch out 100 to 200 little tiny baby mantises will hatch out of that egg case. And on the upper right, that's my fingers and a little tiny, probably couple day old praying mantis. They don't go through any more metamorphosis. They grow from that size. It's like not much bigger than a mosquito at that stage. If you happen to see these egg cases on a plant or a Christmas tree or something you've brought into your house in the wintertime, you don't want to leave that on the tree, because after a couple of weeks at room temperature, you may have 100 or 200 little tiny baby praying mantises loose in your house. They are carnivores. If you don't have a lot of fruit flies for them to eat, they'll start eating each other. It's really difficult to get rid of them. They'll be all over the place. So just beware. But these are easy to find. And almost any time I hike in an area, not in the deep woods, but any kind of overgrown meadow, you'll find these, or in some garden areas too. So caddisfly. Upper right, you see a caddisfly. There are hundreds of caddisfly species. That's another one. The caddisfly adult, which is nocturnal in this case, they kind of look like moths. A lot of the species don't even have a digestive tract. Their only goal as adult caddisfly is to mate, find a mate, lay eggs, and they're gone. So 2 weeks, 4 weeks is the most that they're alive. They are an important source of food for aquatic animals, fish, frogs, etc. So they lay eggs either directly into the water or near water. The larvae hatch out, and they are like a small caterpillar. And on the left side, you'll see just a little, like a black and white striped, that's the head of the caddisfly larva, who has built himself a little case out of pieces of leaves. And the first time I saw one of these, I saw this really interesting looking sectioned, I thought it was a twig. He has this little twig, hexagonal shape, different colors, and then suddenly, and it's in a small stream, and then suddenly my little stick started moving upstream. So I looked a little closer, and so this is a caddisfly larva. They will make this type of case, carry it around with them. They come out at night, and really at night after dark. So this is, you need a flashlight if you want to find one of these little guys. They will later on may replace those leaves with little tiny stones, attach themselves to the underside of a rock to go through their final metamorphosis before they emerge as the adult who pops out of the water in the spring. So for most of the life cycle, there may be 10 months of larva and then just a month or so of the adult side. And seeing these move, my next slide, you'll see these little guys moving around. And is it going to go? Oh, come on. Whoops. It won't play. It was supposed to play. Sorry. Maybe afterwards I can pull this up directly and show you this thing moving around. So what can we do to help animals make the winter? If you can preserve natural areas on your property, large branches, dead trees, leaf litter, if you do nothing else, will give you a lot of bird activity. Planting shrubs that offer shelter from the snow and the cold, and any seed-bearing plants, native plants that produce berries, or some of them just create an insulating soil layer around them. Cats indoors, everyone likes to do that. And then supporting legislation that limits development, because animals need not just habitat, they need corridors that connect the habitat. So it doesn't do as much good to have isolated parks of natural habitat if the animals can't move from one to the other. When you isolate populations, you end up with animals that are inbred, and then you can actually lose your population of animal because they haven't been able to have new genes come in. So thank you very much. We are a 501c3. If you're not a member, we'd love you to join, and you can follow us on Facebook. So, anyone need more questions? Hey, Ann.
That was amazing. I learned a lot.
Oh, okay, good.
That was really nice, Bonnie. I'm going to go out and look for the frozen ponds with the twigs sticking out of it.
Yeah,
And
there you go.
now I know what the skulls look like, and I think there's one in my backyard right now.
Yeah,
So
you
this
did.
is so fun. This is so fun. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah.